IVM.
Welcome to Police Chowki, a special limited series on your favorite public policy podcast, All Things Policy. This series will take you behind the khaki uniform, beyond the flashing red beacon, and into the heart of the functioning of the Indian police force. We cast a critical eye on the role and function of the police in the Indian democracy, from the silent persistence of paperwork and meticulous investigation to risky counterterrorism efforts and policing in conflict zones. We explore the need for police reform and accountability in the system. Each episode brings you a comprehensive exploration of a unique facet of policing, illuminated by the insights of a former IPS officer who has lived the life behind the badge. So join us every Monday morning as we take you into the complex world of Police Chowki.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Police Chowki, a special series on all things policy. I'm your host, Sri Krishna Upadhyaya, and my guest today on the show is Mr. Javeed Ahmed, a former IPS officer and DGP of Uttar Pradesh. And the topic for today's discussion is gun control laws in India. Before I begin, a very warm welcome to you, Mr. Ahmed. Happy to have you on the show.
Good afternoon, Sri. As always, it's a pleasure to be back on Police Chowki, and let's get into the gun fighting mode.
Right. So this topic is a bit unconventional in the Indian context, right? Because we have seen gun control debate as a very polarizing, hot topic in the United States and elsewhere. But in India, it's relatively, ignored in the public discourse as such. Of course, it props up every now and then. But more or less, it's not, a mainstream political issue or anything. That's actually because India has a very low incidence of firearms among our civilian population, right? In 2016, a survey was conducted which put India as to have only 5 guns per 100 civilians, and it ranked 120th among all the countries ranked on the basis of number of guns per 100 civilians, right? And unsurprisingly, the USA came first with a mind-boggling 120 guns per 100 civilians. But this survey again looked at only the licensed firearms. Many believe the unlicensed firearms trade and possession in the country is very huge. And if you had to account that, then the numbers for India would probably go up, right? And similarly, when another study was conducted of 1 lakh firearms which were seized in India between 2014 and 2015, 60% of them were found to be unlicensed, and Uttar Pradesh had the most number of gun seizures and unlicensed guns in circulation, right? When we look at homicide rates, so gun-related homicide deaths in India is a significant number in absolute terms, but in overall homicide rates, it's a very small number. But simply by absolute numbers, India ranks third when it comes to homicides by guns after the United States and Brazil. And in recent reports, one would assume, looking at recent reports, one would assume that gun-related violence is slowly going up. Gang violence, criminal violence, and so on is rising in the society. One incident which comes to my mind is the murder of celebrity Sidhu Moosewala a year ago, which brought the issue of unlicensed guns and criminal gangs operating using guns to commit crimes. It brought such an issue back into the limelight. And for those of you who may remember, a few years ago when another celebrity, Sanjay Dutt, who was convicted for possessing guns without license, and he had to do some jail time as well. So we'll be unpacking many of these issues surrounding guns in India and gun control in India, the historical context, and approaching it also from a policing perspective on today's Police Talk. So, Mr. Ahmed, I want to begin with the social or cultural value of guns in the Indian society, right? In US, we know it's a constitutional right, the right to bear arms. But in India, that's not the case. There is no right to bear arms as such, and we'll come to the history of it a little bit later. But in India, even despite so, guns have attained a certain social status, especially in some regions in the northern parts of the country, including in Uttar Pradesh, right? Now, Uttar Pradesh has the highest number of civilians holding gun licenses. It has, in fact, a disproportionate number of gun licenses in the country as compared to the population, and so on. So, in your experience in Uttar Pradesh, right, what is the gun culture like? Is it growing in popularity, or have things changed over the years? What's been your experience?
Yes, so you're right about the fact that in Uttar Pradesh, having a weapon is considered to be an important marker of your social position, and this is especially so in the Bundelkhand region and in parts of western Uttar Pradesh in the Agra belt. The reasons for that, I suppose, would essentially be that these are the regions that have traditionally had a lot of dacoity and kidnapping gangs over the last 1 century. And guns were used as to protect your friend and family and property against these gangs. The second thing is that in those areas, the accessibility of the villages is pretty used to be very bad. Roads were few and far between, especially in what are known as the Chambal ravines, that area, the other ravines in Bundelkhand, with the result that the possibility of the police or other law enforcement agencies being able to come over and help you when you wanted help was quite far away, distant. So that was probably one reason why guns became a very important asset to have. The third point was that this is also the area where there was these small Raja type of elements who were in control, and they, before obvious reasons, used to have a lot of weapons to enforce their will upon people. So, as a corollary to that, post independence, a lot of people who could manage to have a weapon started having a weapon because it gave them some kind of status vis-a-vis the tradition of Rajas having a weapon. Now, what has happened is that having a licensed weapon is often a license for getting a job in urban centers, in malls and in residential societies in urban areas, these or in banks and other establishments. So often the weapon becomes the door that opens a small job for people, and these are areas which are very, very backward with very poor employment opportunities locally. So that broadly seems to explain why the Bundelkhand and the Agra region have this obsession with weapons. Having said that, you mentioned some figures about 5 persons in 100 having weapons in India. I would think that it would be 5 in 1 lakh. Maybe the figures need to be revisited because very few people in India have weapons.
Right. So I think the figures talked about the number of firearms per 100 population. So it is the number of firearms and not the number of people who possess firearms.
Okay. Yeah, there are people who have multiple weapons. So
Exactly.
yeah, there are people who have multiple weapons. Now, in fact, what has happened is that after the new rules of 2016 have come in,
Yeah.
per license, a person can have only 2 weapons. Earlier, it used to be much more. People used to have 4 or 5 weapons on one license.
Right. So also, but there is also certain social clout attached to guns, I believe, because we have seen it on, in pop culture and so on, where, holding a katta gives, kind of some amount of clout within a particular peer group, or firing guns in marriages during Bharat and so on is also part of some like cultural traditions, right?
Yes, kattas and illegal weapons are a totally different, concept. I mean, they are a totally different category. Kattas are quite rampant in rural Uttar Pradesh, and I am aware of the situation in Bihar. I can say that for Bihar and for Madhya Pradesh, kattas are reasonably easily available, and any boy who wanna be criminal or wanna be dada or someone who is living in a village and he has no other way of protecting himself against someone who may bully him or his family would possess a katta, not necessarily because he wants to use it, but as a weapon of last resort.
Right.
The troubling thing is that kattas are very easily available because there's a big and we'll talk about it at some stage during our talk today about the
Yeah.
availability of weapons, illegal and legal weapons, and secondly that kattas are quite cheap actually. You can buy them with a small investment. And the thing is that in many parts of North India, there are these small katta factories which are operating under a shack, and they manufacture these crude and actually now not so crude kattas, which make the availability that much more easy and rampant.
Right. Yeah, we'll come to this whole aspect of illegal trade of weapons and so on a bit later. But while researching for this episode, came across some bit of history on gun control laws in India, which I was totally unaware of, and I felt it's worthwhile to share it. Right. So the first gun control law in India came into effect after the First War of Independence back in 1857. The Britishers, who had witnessed the native population rise up in arms against the colonial rule, decided that we need to regulate arms, and they brought in the first Arms Act, which created this whole system of licensing, and it started regulating sale, possession, manufacturing of arms, and so on. Right, but there was an aspect of India's freedom struggle where the Indian population were protesting against such measures by the British because they saw this as a way of continuation of colonial suppression and preventing the Indian people from exercising their self-defense by denying them weaponry, right? So there was this whole angle to it. And later on in the Karachi Resolution of 1931, which is very famous and where a list of fundamental rights was deliberated upon and endorsed by the Congress. And this resolution actually provided that every citizen should have the right to keep and bear arms in accordance with the regulations and reservation made in that behalf, right? And what fascinated me even more that there was a constituency of people who supported gun rights during the Constituent Assembly debate, which was forming the constitution in the late 1940s, right? For example, Mr. H.V. Kamath advocated an amendment to the Fundamental Rights chapter of the Constitution, where he said that we must include the right to bear arms. And in his argument in support of such an issue, he said that villains and criminals have always managed and will always manage to get arms, whether there is an arms act or not, and it is the law-abiding citizen who has always suffered in that bargain. And he says, who suffers during criminal riots and disturbances are not the violent elements of the society, but rather the law-abiding citizens, and these have to be protected by giving them gun rights. And and in support of his claims, he also makes a argument that we are a free country, we're going to be an independent country, and not allowing gun rights will create a most unfortunate impression on our countrymen that the government does not trust the people, that the government has no faith in the people, or rather the government is afraid of the people, right? And almost in jest, he also says that the ministers of the government are opposing my amendment to bring in gun rights because they already have security guards outside their bungalows, but it is the ordinary citizen who has no armed guard about him, no guard standing outside his house. So I was very fascinated to learn about this, how there was actually a discussion on gun rights during our Constituent Assembly, right? So this is something I found very fascinating. Other than that, I also found out that there's a community of Kodavas, or the people who are from the Coorg district in Karnataka, right? Who actually have an exemption from Arms Act, and they can possess firearms. And this is because the British classified them as a martial race, and they sort of gave this exemption, and which has continued after independence. And in fact, there was a constitutional challenge to this, but the Karnataka High Court has upheld this exemption given to Kodavas to buy and possess firearms without any license. So this bit of history is very
It's not
interesting.
only
So I thought I'd
fascinating,
share.
it's also very prescient what Mr. Kamath said about ministers having guards outside their bungalows and the criminal having weapons and the common man not having weapons. It's playing out just to that script.
Yeah. So that having said that, let's look at some of the specifics of the gun control regulation in the country, right? So the Arms Act of 1959, along with the Arms Rules of 2016, are the primary legal frameworks which currently govern the possession, acquisition, and carrying of firearms in our country, right? And these are very strict regulations. It's very difficult to get a gun license in India. So I want to know from you, Mr. Ahmed, from your experience in police. So what is the procedure for getting a gun license in India? How does it work? What is the role the police plays? What is the kind of background checks that take place? And in fact, is there any check on the mental health status of the applicant? Because we have seen a lot of cases, especially in the US, where people suffering from mental illnesses have uh, uh, ended up doing mass shootings and so
Yes,
on.
getting a license for a weapon in India is very, very difficult. In fact, the law is framed in such a way that the total discretion lies with the state authorities, including the police authorities, and those who are able to get a license almost see it as a favor which has been given to them by the state. Uh, so, in case someone wants to have a license, he has to be 21 years of age. He has to be of sound mental health. He should have no criminal history. There's a once a person has applied for the license, there's a police verification which is done at the local level to find out about his criminal activities and about his associates. They also want to check whether you have a house which is safe enough to keep the weapon so that it doesn't get stolen or looted or whatever. So those are the requirements. There's no or virtually no timeline for finalizing an application for license. So from my personal experience, I can tell you that people have applied and have waited 5 years, 3 years, 7 years to get a license, or be told that it has been rejected because it keeps circulating from one office to another, from one desk to another, and unless you have some kind of linkage or some kind of pull in the normal course, getting a license in India is very difficult. And normally it is given by the office of the district magistrate. The or the In the bigger cities, it is given by the office of the commissioner of police. So those are broadly the modalities. License is given only for non-prohibited bore weapons. There's a categorization of non-prohibited and prohibited. Prohibited bores are obviously the ones which are slightly bigger bore, but you can get license for a 22 rifle or a 38 rifle, or for a shotgun, which are considered to be less lethal. Getting a license for a shotgun is comparatively easier than getting it for a rifle, and getting it for a rifle is comparatively easier than getting it for a revolver, and getting it for a revolver is easier than getting it for a pistol. That is the pecking order, if I can say so. So that is how it is. It's difficult, and as I said before, for one license, a person can hold only two weapons. Earlier it used to be three. Earlier, before that, it used to be five. But now it is only two weapons per license. In fact, now after the 2016 rules, the government has started what is known as the National Directory of Armed Licenses, where every license is registered with what is called a UIN, or a unique identity number, so that chances of the license being forged, or a duplicate one being made, or a fake one being made is reduced. Since we are talking about fake license, let me tell you from personal experience that there was a time when very, very large number of fake licenses were floating around in northern India. They were supposed to have been issued from some district in far off Nagaland or Arunachal Pradesh, and obviously the person who was holding that license was a resident of Lucknow or Kanpur or Agra or wherever, and the license said that it's been issued by the district magistrate of some district in Manipur or in some district in Nagaland or Arunachal. On that basis, weapons were purchased, and there were a huge number of weapons that were ultimately we busted that in UP. And I remember in my district where I was SP, about 1,800 weapons were recovered with fake licenses. Similar numbers of fake licenses were discovered in many other districts. So, with this unique identification number thing in place, I think those possibilities are substantially reduced.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break. Right. So, if one were to go with the general commentary on the gun licensing and gun control regime in the country, many would appreciate it for it being so strict and for it being so difficult to obtain a license and carry firearms. And many assume that, this is probably why India has such low levels of gun violence compared to the overall rates of crime or overall size of the population, which is a good thing, of course, as compared to the West and USA especially. But at the same time, when we have such a sort of strict regime controlling gun licensing in the country, I can imagine two unintended consequences of this, right? One is, first, of course, any person who perceives himself to be at risk and needs protection and wants to carry firearms, it becomes increasingly difficult for him to do it. And some of it can be a time sensitive case where this person has individual threat perception, but he has to wait for months or years to get a license to protect himself. So that is sort of impinging upon the right to self defense of this person, if I may put it that way. And the second unintended consequence, of course, is that it creates a huge black market for weapons. It creates all kinds of unsafe weapons being circulated in the market. It creates all sorts of criminal gangs which crop up, in smuggling and transporting and distributing these weapons. If I were to ask you a very, like, zoom out and ask a very broad question, like, do you think the gun control regime as it stands today has been largely successful, so it must remain so? Or do you think there is scope for improvement and scope for a bit of liberalization so that the problems I spoke about can be tackled better?
The problems that you talked about are very well appreciated. There's no doubt that very few people who have the resources to buy weapons buy it, and then it becomes not only a status symbol, but in the present scenario, it becomes also a asset that is used to perpetuate one's superiority in the society, not only in social terms, but also in terms of preventing someone else from exercising his bona fide rights. Now, having said that, India's population being what it is, and the income levels being what they are, and the levels of poverty being what they are, suppose we were to shift to a situation where anyone can buy a weapon, the chances are that only those who have the resources, which obviously is a very small minority of people in our country, would go for buying weapons. Now, the question then would arise whether these weapons would further give them a handle to browbeat, or to kind of lord over those who don't have weapons, or those who are unable to fight for their rights. And my assessment is that it would create another class of people who, besides many other privileges and blessings of the Almighty that they have, would have another weapon, literally to use against those who are demanding their rights, fighting for their rights, and demanding a due share of what the nation and society has to offer. That is one argument that I would make. So before we kind of take a position on whether people should have the freedom to bear arms, one should also always keep this aspect in mind. The second thing is that right now, as you very rightly said, it is the state which has the monopoly over the use of force. Now, even for civil self-defense, while use of force by a common citizen or a common man is permitted under law, the proviso is that you will use only that much force as is required to save yourself. So when we talk about allowing or creating a regime where people can bear arms freely, we have to keep this in mind, that it doesn't further give a handle to those who are in positions of authority and have the wherewithal to purchase a weapon, whether that will be used to further create divisions in the society which is already divided. I would think that in the present situation, where there are so many fractures already in the society, this would be a step that would create more problems than it would solve. The other part is that these presently the laws are so designed in India that the state is the has the monopoly over the use of force. Even if someone is beaten up on a street corner, it is the state which takes up his case against the person who's the aggressor. If there are weapons being used, weapons are freely available, the chances of that weapon being used and more injury and more deaths and all that will increase. So the state's monopoly over the use of force will be diluted to that extent, and therefore a lot of changes will be required in the law also. At the present situation, given the fractious nature of our politics, with so many fault lines developing, having, I would say that it would not be the best time to do it.
Right. No, that's a very pertinent point that you raise. Uh, uh, that's a very pertinent point that you put out there. But I think the consequence of what you're saying is essentially that the state capacity must now be focused towards curbing the illegal sale and trade of firearms, right? Now, illegal arms in India is widespread. There are racketeers, smugglers, criminal gangs who are involved in these activities, and they pose a significant challenge to the authority of the law enforcement as well as public safety, right? From a policing perspective, I want to know what is the Indian police doing about illegal trade in firearms? What are the steps that are being taken? How effective these have been in curbing the circulation of unlicensed guns and arms?
So, when we answer this question, I would bifurcate the answer into two categories. One is the recovery and seizure of country-made unlicensed pistols or the kattas that we talked about, and the other is the what are in police parlance called factory-made weapons. Now, as far as the country-made kattas are concerned, the NCRB records of 2022 show that in that particular year, 2022, in Uttar Pradesh, 40,000 over 40,000 kattas had been recovered in Uttar Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh, more than 13,000, Rajasthan, over almost 7,000, and Bihar, just over 4,000. These were the four leading states as far as the recovery of weapons is concerned. As I said before, the manufacture at almost as a cottage industry level of kattas, and their availability in North India is has always been a matter of concern. And Not only are these weapons sold locally, but there are gangs which manufacture these weapons in places like Munger in Bihar or Rampur in UP and a few other places, and they are supplied because of their good quality and good price. They are supplied right up to Delhi and Punjab. There are gangs that do this gun running of illicit weapons right across the whole of North India. So that is something that the police seems to be doing, trying to bust these factories and catch the gun runners and the gangs that are running it. But to say that there is an all India program to curb these, or that there's an all India perspective, that unfortunately is missing. And the result is that people who get caught in, let us say, Uttar Pradesh, manufacturing or making these kattas, they go to jail, come out, they shift to Bihar for a bit, get caught there, then they come out and shift to Madhya Pradesh. That kind of excuse me, that kind of thing happens, and the police is aware that these people keep shifting from one district to another or from one state to another, and that creates a lot of problem. I want to highlight one more thing before we go to the factory-made weapons, and that is the fact that while kattas are made, almost as a cottage industry in some parts of North India, the other related problem is the pilferage of ammunition. You see, ammunition is not made that easily, especially for the pistol or for a rifle. It's almost impossible to make it locally. There are very few centers that illegally make it. Unfortunately, what has happened is that the pilferage of ammunition from the army, from the police forces, and such other organized law enforcement agencies is a major problem. And I believe that not enough has been done to ensure that this pilferage does not happen, and that a tracking of every cartridge or bullet that is recovered can be done, so that the point of pilferage or the person from whom pilferage is being done can be traced back. There is there are talks going on at the international level. It's called the Arms Trade Treaty, which is in the works for many years, where an attempt is being made to have some kind of laser tagging of every batch of ammunition, so that it can be traced back to the lot or the bunch from where this particular ammunition has been pilfered, etc. But those exercises are still they still haven't fructified. So the result is that ammunition pilferage happens, and happens quite rampantly. Quite rampantly. There are occasions when physical verification of ammunition is done at the police lines in various districts, and you find that 500, 1,000, 5,000 weapons have been are missing. Ammunition rounds are missing, and that is something that the Indian police and the whole arrangement around ammunition storage needs to be tightened. Now, coming back to the license or to the factory-made weapons, whether it is revolvers or pistols or even Kalashnikov rifles, which are quite easily available in some parts of our country. Uh, these weapons come in from the northwest, places like Dera Ismail Khan in Pakistan and adjoining areas in Afghanistan, where weapons are floating very freely for a variety of reasons, geopolitical and other reasons. Weapons have dumped into those areas. Those very easily find their way into Kashmir and to Punjab, some parts of Rajasthan, because the border is there. And while human movement is difficult, sending weapons across is always possible. Things are getting better now in terms of the fencing and the all that being done, but it continues. The other area is the China, Myanmar, Manipur, axis through which a lot of weapons come in. Once again, the terrain is bad, the border is porous, with the result that weapons keep coming in. A lot of weapons came in to India in the south from the Sri Lankan side, where a lot of weapons were floating in the market because of the tigers, etc., who were there. So there's a constant supply of weapons, and obviously there is a constant demand for these weapons by various extremist groups which are operating in India, whether it's the left wing extremists or those in Punjab, or the activities of the anti-nationals in Kashmir. Similarly, in the various mafias that operate in various parts of the country, the sand mafia or the forest mafia, the mining mafia who operate in various parts of this country, one of the essential wherewithals for their operation is the availability of strong men who are armed very heavily, who can intimidate anyone who is trying to come in the way, whether it is in terms of preventing the pilferage of natural resources, or a rival gang. So there's a huge amount of demand for weapons by these kind of people. So mafias, contractors, and hired killers, and these are people who are in one way or the other linked to or have affiliation with local political operatives. We are aware of how weapons are used as a source of intimidation during political activities. And we talked about Mr. Kamath in the Constituent Assembly, virtually being prescient about this, and that unfortunately is very true. So there's a demand and there's a huge supply. Unfortunately, because these weapons are manufactured not in India but outside, there's a need for international collaboration on it. And as I was mentioning, there's a ongoing talks for what is called the Arms Trade Treaty under the auspices of the United Nations. But because of various factors, these talks have not led to any kind of fruitful architecture being created for preventing the movement of unlicensed weapons across borders. The Interpol has some kind of directory where they have a list of weapons that have been stolen and reported having been stolen or smuggled or missing, and it provides some kind of backup, especially in Europe where the situation is much better in terms of being able to link any weapon that is stolen or recovered. So that kind of arrangement needs to be put in place sooner rather than later in India as well.
I was curious just in terms of accessibility of these weapons, right? Now, you spoke of three categories. One is country made weapons, then factory made weapons in the black market, in the illegal market, and of course, over the counter legal weapons that you can purchase. So, how accessible are they in terms of price, right? How cheap or costly they are? I mean, of course, I don't plan to get one, but I just wanted to understand as to how easy or difficult it is to actually get it in terms of the money you have to pay for it.
Frankly, I wouldn't know. Yeah, but from what I can make out, there are periods when an AK-47 is very reasonably cheap to purchase. But you have to know the right people. It's not available in India, at least off the counter. I'm told that is the case in Dera Ismail Khan and that part of the world, where virtually there's a market and you can just go and pick up. You have to have sources who will make it available for you. They are not cheap, but they are not cheap for us. I mean, for people who use that as a as a capital for creating more wealth in economic terms. It's a factor of production kind of thing.
Investment.
It's an investment. The kattas obviously are comparatively cheaper. There are kattas and there are kattas. There are kattas which fire just one round, and there are kattas which fire 4 rounds, 6 rounds. So those obviously are more sleek and more expensive.
So that would you would put it in few thousands
Yeah,
or
a
touching the
katta
lakh.
would be maybe 2.5, 3,000 or something like that. A better,
That's
a
bloody cheap.
reasonably good katta would be about 8,000, 10,000, something like that. But these Kalashnikovs and other what are called factory-made weapons, revolvers, pistols, they come pretty expensive. They come pretty
Right.
expensive.
So, moving on from this whole business of katas and all, before we close, I wanted to raise one more point and have a sort of like small discussion about it. And this issue is about arming our police officers, right? Now, of course, all of us know the Indian constable still goes around performing his duties with a lathi in his hand, right? And sometimes when he faces criminals who have like more sophisticated weapons on their hands, it's almost hapless situation because the constable just doesn't have the firepower to sort of like fight back and uphold the law. So this debate is not just confined to India. There's a global debate on should the police be armed, should they be heavily armed, what kind of arms and ammunition should they be provided with, and at what level do we balance arming the police as opposed to adopting more tactical other kind of like tactical methods like surveillance and so on for fulfilling the functions of police. So I want to know your broad thoughts on this issue, right? What is the situation in India? What factors determine the level of armament that is given to the police officers? Is it based on rank? How does it work? And of course, do you think the Indian police are sufficiently armed, or is there a need to sort of arm them further? And then finally, of course, do you also foresee a danger? Because if we are going to arm our police with more sophisticated weapons, then the kind of damage they can do is also higher. So they could be more uh, police brutality, so to speak, in our Indian context. So, what are your thoughts?
So, as far as the arming of police personnel is concerned, all sub inspectors who are in a field duty, whether it is at the Thana level or the Chowki level, they are issued a weapon, a sidearm, which they pack as part of their uniform. And senior officers obviously have a small detachment of people with weapons who are at their disposal whenever they are out in the field. Other police officers who are not in field duties, for example, in the CID or in the intelligence department or economic offences wing or others, would normally not carry weapons, and I don't think there is any need for them to carry weapons. The constabulary in the Thana is normally given lathis, which is their standard issue, and there are some weapons available in the Thana to be issued as and when required to the constable who's trained to use the weapon. These are these rifles. It used to be the old 303 rifles. Now they are being more or less phased out. At least in Uttar Pradesh, they are more or less 95% phased out. And you have what are called the INSAS rifles or the SLRs. Now, these weapons are quite lethal. They are quite good. So, my personal assessment is that rather than have every constable armed with a weapon which can cause fatal injuries, it is best to have a mix of people who are in the normal course. We are talking about a normal situation of patrolling or of area domination, as we call it, yeah, where maybe one third of the people who are one third of the police party that is patrolling an area is armed, and the others are with a lathi, because you will use a weapon only in very rare situations. And the job of the police, more often than not, is not to use force, but to, since we are operating in a non-disturbed area, in an urban area, in Bangalore, for example, on Brigade Road. I mean, I don't think it'll be very nice if we have 20 guys, with AK-47s moving around. It's much better if they are available, if they are, maybe with a lathi or a small this thing, with a small baton, so that they give the impression of not being enemies or of not being intimidating, but of being accessible. And that is the whole idea of policing. The idea of policing is not to intimidate. The idea of policing is to be a friend, or at least a person who is approachable and who is there to solve your problems. So this whole this arming of constables will, to my mind, take them further away from the common man, who may be that much more hesitant to approach them for some trouble that he's in. I mean, imagine a young girl who's being teased by some ruffians on a street corner, and she having to go and talk to four policemen who are armed with Kalashnikovs or with other semi-automatic weapons of some kind. Uh, I would rather have a situation where they give the impression of being approachable, friendly, and more often than not, the guys who are the troublemakers are also not armed. And as a backup, you have one third of the people armed in case someone acts funny or starts using a weapon. So that is broadly how I see it.
Right. So thanks for joining me today on this discussion, Mr. Ahmed. A lot of interesting points came up, and I believe, of course, I what was eye opening for me that in India there exists a constituency for gun rights, and this has existed for quite some time. And our laws, despite being that strict and regimented, I still believe we have more or less achieved some sort of success in gun control and ensuring that gun violence rates, homicide rates using guns are controlled and remain reasonably low. Right. So thanks once again, and happy to chat with you always.
Yeah, before we end, there's just a small snippet. The person who's the king of gun running worldwide is a person called Victor Bout, Bout. There's some Russian gentleman who is an absolute king of gun running internationally. Apparently, a book by the name of Merchant of Death has been written based on his life and times, and it's been converted into a movie called The Lord of War. And he's so big time that he provides weapons to clients across the world, including to Africa, where instead of money in lieu of the guns that he provides, he ensures that his clients dig and mine diamonds illegally and provide it to him. If you recall, they used to be called blood diamonds because
Exactly.
these diamonds used to be given as barter for the weapons, and those weapons would be used for the civil war in Liberia and such other places. So
Yes.
guns have various uses. They can also produce diamonds.
Yeah. On that note, let's close the conversation today. Thanks once again, and see you again in the coming week on Police Shop.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.